The thing about landing at Living Hope is that typically you've been traveling for several days. You come in hot, tired, you haven't slept, you get whisked off from the airport to the orphanage, and you're greeted by the children, and they sing. You just feel the love. It's like electricity. It's like walking into a place where every particle is charged. And you might have been tired and sticky and hungry before, but you are nothing else but filled with wonder. By the mercy of the Lord. Living Hope from Zambia. That farm is really unusual because it is an orphanage that started a coffee farm to make itself more sustainable. The first time we went to Living Hope, it wasn't possible to stay on the orphanage compound. This time, because they've been able to build some new buildings to house some of the children, so they've been able to shift the compound for the girls. So we were able to stay in that former housing. And it meant that we took all of our meals with the kids and with the workers. It meant that we were there to hear the kids sing themselves to sleep at night. It meant that when we had a down moment, we were surrounded by children who had questions for us, great conversations. It was the difference between looking at a postcard of something, which is kind of how the first trip to Living Hope felt, and actually being there, being in it, being fully immersed. We're really proud and extremely pleased to be able to tell you that they now have a coffee farmer, an actual person whose job it is to be the coffee farmer, and that is Juana Chapoya.
He's 24 years old, very enthusiastic, very engaged, very proud. He is the one that took us around to all the points of the farm and gave us, the in-detail update of different sections of the farm.
And he's learned so much over the last year. I loved sitting and talking to him about all of these big plans he has to change the way they prune, to change what they plant, when they plant, how far apart they plant, the kind of shade they're going to be putting in. Juana's a science brain. He looks at the world as a problem that can be solved if you just have the right kind of information and you apply it. He understood that they needed to be more sustainable. They're paying for fertilizer. What if they could cut the cost of that by creating some of their own compost? The stuff that comes off of the coffee trees, exactly the stuff that you pulled out of the ground. If you put it back, you've gone a long way to fertilizing your crop.
In Zambia, there's not a lot of annual rainfall, and so this particular farm has to be irrigated. They pump up water, put it in a reservoir, and of course irrigate all the fields. And that's great if you have electricity. But the electricity in Zambia is random at best. So an improvement that has been made is they now have solar panels. They're storing energy in batteries, and no longer are there periods of time when A, there's no rain, and B, there's no electricity.
A coffee tree can produce for a really long time, but it gets its best production in its first 5 to 7 years. So you do need to replace those plants on a regular basis. And you don't want to just replace them with anything. You want to replace them with the plants that are performing particularly well on your plot. So the seedling farm is going to be the engine for how they can increase their annual poundage in the short run.
When coffee grows, it grows as a cherry. There are 2 seeds inside, and those seeds are the coffee beans that we know and use. But when you wet mill, you take the pulp off, and you generally discard the pulp. You can also use it in composting, and you free up those 2 seeds to be dried in the sun.
Currently, the way they wet mill, well, it's pretty antiquated, and it's kind of a choke point, a bottleneck point. The people who pick the coffee bring big bags of it and dump it into a very small machine that sort of spits it out. But you can only do a very few batches at a time. And coffee needs to be processed pretty close to the second it was picked, or it begins to ferment and it can change the taste of the coffee. They've designed and are creating a new wet mill facility there that will vastly speed up their ability to process their coffee and also increase their capacity, because they're also very interested in increasing the amount of coffee that they grow every year. One of the ways they're going to do that is talking to other landowners about maybe taking some of their land, and Living Hope would make the sizable infrastructure improvements so they'd have access to water for irrigation. Of course, that means that the family whose land that is would also have access to that clean water on their property, which can be a real game changer in that part of the world. They would also train these people on how to grow coffee, give them the best practices, help coach them through that, and then they'd be able to take their coffee, harvest that coffee, and send it to Big B Coffee, and then share some of the rewards with their neighbors. They're using coffee not only to support the orphanage, it's an economic engine in Ndola.
You know, other improvements up until this point, workers ate outside, and, you know, it was pretty nice in Zambia. It's not a bad place to eat, but you're not sitting on chairs, you're kind of sitting on the ground. They had their cooking outside over an open flame, and there's no place to really use a restroom and so on. So there's a major facility being built that house all those things.
When we initially got into this relationship with Living Hope, we were really thinking a lot about the orphans. But what we've really come to understand is how important Living Hope is as a way of driving economic improvements in the region. There's this one great example of a woman by the name of Shelley, who was one of the first people to donate land to the orphanage in exchange for the promise of a steady job. She's a widow. She went from being a subsistence farmer. In the time that she's been working at Living Hope with that regular employment, that regular paycheck, she has built herself a house. She has built 2 other houses that she rents to other workers. She's now putting her great nieces and great grandchildren through school. Just knowing that she was going to have a steady stream of money that she could count on, that she could rely on, has changed her life. And that story's true for every one of the 20 permanent employees that work on the farm at Living Hope. Living Hope has great ambition, not just to change the arc of the lives of the children that are in their care, but also to open up the kinds of opportunities that they're providing for these orphans to children in the region, in the neighborhoods. There are a lot more vulnerable children in that area of the world than they can possibly bring into their orphanage. One of the ways they're talking about doing that is creating just a top-of-the-line school. The plans have been in place since our last visit in 2018. This time we got to see the buildings are there. They haven't started the school yet. That should happen next school year. They've also built a kitchen. They're going to be feeding those kids breakfast and lunch every day. Hunger is a serious challenge in that region, so it's going to be a very powerful change when it comes online. The soccer field is so exciting. You know, when we were first there in 2018, they had really just put it in. There was barely any grass. It's come so far now. It's just created this center of life right there at the orphanage.
When we wrapped up at Living Hope and it was time to go, I think, you know, the biggest thing that happens naturally when we do these follow-up visits is how right it feels, how good it feels, how we know that we're on the right track, and we feel from them that they are on the right track too.
A name, a face, and a place for every coffee we serve.